oh Lord, could save themselves, their own soul could heal. Our shame was deeper than the sea, but your grace is deeper still. Who, oh Lord, could save themselves, their own soul could heal? 'Cause our shame was deeper than the sea, but your grace is deeper still. And you alone can rescue, you alone can save, you alone can lift us from the grave. You came down to find us, let us out of death. To you alone belongs the highest praise. 'Cause you, oh Lord, have made a way, the great divide you heal. For when our hearts were far away, your love went further still. Oh yes, your love goes further still. You alone can rescue, you alone can save, you alone can lift us from the grave. You came down to find us, let us out of death. To you alone belongs the highest praise. To you alone belongs the highest praise. You alone. So we lift up our eyes, lift up our eyes to the giver of life. Yeah, we lift up our eyes, lift up our eyes to the giver of life. Yeah, we lift up our eyes, lift up our eyes to the giver of life. Oh, we lift up our eyes, lift up our eyes to the giver of life. So we lift up our eyes, lift up our eyes to the giver of life. Yeah, we lift up our eyes, lift up our eyes to the giver of life. Hey, yeah, we lift up our eyes, lift up our eyes to the giver of life. So we lift up our eyes, lift up our eyes to the giver of life. You alone can rescue, you alone can save, you alone can lift us from the grave. You came down to find us, let us out of death. To you alone belongs the highest praise. To you alone belongs the highest praise. To you alone belongs the highest praise.
Hi everyone. I will be giving a guided meditation today. I did one last week and I got a lot of good feedback about it, so I thought I'd try it again this week. I invite you to sit comfortably with me, whether that's on the floor or in a chair. Mary Todd is going to be my assistant today. I'm going to have some photos up on the screen for you to meditate on that were taken by our very own Sarah Reynolds of nature and landscape. So I just invite you to meditate on God's beauty and majesty during this meditation. I invite you to take some deep breaths with me, and I want you to fill your lungs up entirely. Another deep breath. And another one. I want you to turn your attention to how your body is feeling right now. Do you have any aches or pains? How is your neck feeling? Give it a good stretch. Turn it from side to side. How is your upper back feeling? Are there any aches? Tense muscles? How are your shoulders? Are they relaxed? Are they tight? How is your jaw? Is it relaxed or is it clenched together? Take some more deep breaths with me. Fill your entire lungs with air. Going to read an excerpt from the Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman. St. Francis of Assisi, in his youth, found it impossible to control his deep physical and emotional revulsion against leprosy. So acute was his reaction that he could not ever run the risk of looking at a leper. Shortly after he had made his first commitment to the Lord, he was riding down the road when suddenly there appeared a leper. Instinctively, he turned his horse around and went galloping off in the opposite direction, his whole body bathed in nervous sweat. Then he realized what he was doing. Leprosy was one of the things he could not stand. As long as that was true, leprosy would be his jailer, his master. He turned around as abruptly as before, found the leper, and according to the story, remained with him, living intimately with him until every trace of his previous reaction had been mastered. Thus freed, he could be of tremendous service to the victims of the disease. There are many experiences which we face that are completely overwhelming. As we see them, they are too terrible even to contemplate. And yet we must face them and deal with them directly. to deal with the problem without the emotional upheaval is necessary if you are ever going to be able to manage it at all. There can be no more significant personal resolution than this. I will face the problem I have been putting off because of too much fear, of too many tears, of too much resentment, even if it means crying all the way through, in order that I may learn to deal with it without fear, tears, or resentment. Take some more deep breaths with me. I want you to ponder as we're taking these deep breaths. What is that one thing that you are too afraid to confront? Like St. Francis, what is the leprosy that you are so afraid of? That one thing that you cannot stand. Keep taking deep breaths with me. We may not realize it, but that one thing that we cannot stand can imprison us, can be our jailer, can make us its master, control our behavior and keep us living in fear. What is one way that we can liberate ourselves from these things that we cannot stand? How can we confront it directly? As we continue in worship together, I invite you to reflect. How can you confront that one thing? How can you liberate yourself from it so it doesn't cause muscle tension, doesn't make you break out in a nervous sweat? Then and only then can we liberate ourselves from it. Let us go in peace and liberation today.
A reading from Isaiah 58, the Voice translation.
Tell my people about their wrongdoing. Shout with a voice like a trumpet. Hold nothing back. Say, this people of Jacob's line and heritage have failed to do what is right. And yet they look for me every day. They pretend to want to learn what I teach, as if they are indeed a nation good and true, as if they hadn't really turned their backs on my directives. They even ask me, as though they care, about what I want them to be and do, as if they really want me in their lives.
Why didn't you notice how we diligently fasted before you? We humbled ourselves with pious practices, and you paid no attention.
I have to tell you, on those fasting days, all you were really seeking was your own pleasure. Besides, you were busy defrauding people and abusing your workers. Your kind of fasting is pointless, for it only leads to bitter quarrels, contentious backbiting, and vicious fighting. You are not fasting today because you want me to hear your voice. What kind of fast do I choose? Is it a true fast, simply some religious exercise for making a person feel miserable and woeful? Is it about how you bow your head like a bent reed, how you dress in sackcloth, and where you sit in a bed of ashes? Is this what you call a fast, a day the Eternal One finds good and proper? No. What I want in a fast is this: to liberate those tied down and held back by injustice, to lighten the load of those heavily burdened, to free the oppressed and shatter every type of oppression. A fast for me involves sharing your food with people who have none, giving those who are homeless a space in your home, giving clothes to those who need them, and not neglecting your own family. Then, oh then, your light will break out like the warm golden rays of a rising sun. In an instant you will be healed. Your rightness will precede and protect you. The glory of the Eternal will follow and defend you. Then when you do call out, "My God, where are you?" the Eternal One will answer, "I am here, I am here." If you remove the yoke of oppression from the downtrodden among you, stop accusing others, and do away with mean and inflammatory speech. If you make sure that the hungry and oppressed have all they need, then your light will shine in the darkness, and even your bleakest moments will be bright as a clear day. The Eternal One will never leave you. He will lead you in the way that you should go. When you feel dried up and worthless, God will nourish you and give you strength, and you will grow like a garden lovingly tended. You will be like a spring whose water never runs out. You will discover there are people among your own who can rebuild this broken down city out of the ancient ruins. You will firm up its ancient foundations, and all around others will call you repairer of broken down walls and rebuilder of livable streets. If because of the Sabbath you set aside your own pursuits and pleasures, and you honor the Sabbath and sanctify that day by leaving it to and for the Eternal, if you speak of Sabbath delight, but avoid speaking idle words, and refuse to get caught up and busy with your interests and concerns, then you will discover joy, such as only the Eternal can give. And I will raise you high, and make your reach as wide as the earth. And you will live on all that I promised to Jacob, your ancestor, the heart of Israel.
Good evening. If you are watching this on Sunday evening, welcome to the gathering. If you are watching this at any other point in your week, thank you for making the gathering part of your week. It is an absolute pleasure to be with you from far away, albeit virtually, here in Durango. I'm so thankful for the technology that we have that allows us to join together in this way. You have just heard the stunning, impassioned sermon of Isaiah 58. It is a sermon that I hear and think to myself, well, there's not much that I can add on to that. There's not much commentary that can come out. There isn't much interpretation that can happen. It's pretty cut and dry, pretty clear. There's no need for exegesis. God wants the people of Israel to know what worship looks like. And worship is about mimicking the justice and mercy of God. Pure and simple. Do these things and live into the reconciling work of God's future. Pure and simple. Do these things. It is a sermon repeated over and over by the prophets. God speaks to the people of Israel about getting distracted by the ins and outs of worship practice while ignoring what Jesus calls the weightier matters. Justice, mercy, and love. It is a simple 14-verse powerhouse of a sermon that is convicting and challenging, and perhaps that is the meditation some of you need today. If so, I encourage you to read it. Take in its poetry, take in the challenges, and above all, listen. But I will be honest. Isaiah preached that sermon much better than I ever could. And so I'm going to go a different direction with my meditation tonight and talk about the prophetic imagination. The prophetic imagination is one that stays firmly grounded in the issues of the present while looking to the hope that is sometimes intangible and seemingly distant. The prophets were and are artists who paint portraits of a world yet to be and ask us to participate. In the middle of March, just as Colorado was beginning to shut down due to the novel coronavirus, I received 2 texts from friends. The first said, "It will be interesting to see what kind of art comes out of this time." The other, from a friend who had just watched a sermon on the prophets, said, "He described the prophets as poets, and I loved that. If thought of in that way, does that show that God speaks through art or artists?" And a little further on, she continued, "Let's start finding the art that speaks to us and listen." Both of these texts have stuck with me as we have walked through the season of pandemic and protest. They have stuck with me as I have walked through my first year here at Mercy Regional Medical Center and seen the stunning impact of the loss of community, societal racism, and income inequality, and how they work into the healthcare system. And in the midst of that, I have found myself grasping on to the words of prophets, whether they be modern or biblical, whether they be musical or written. I've seen that these prophets are speaking to rouse a deaf world. I cannot help but see that the prophetic imagination helps us cling to hope. In the words of Robert Kennedy, some men see things as they are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. Such is the gift of prophetic imagination, propelling us forward to live into the hope of God's future, where the home of God is among mortals. God will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more. Those, of course, are the words of Revelation 21 that speak to that hope of God's future as well. And the prophets find themselves grounded in the hope of that future, speaking in to a world that just doesn't see it. My colleague at Mercy Regional Medical Center has been reading a book called The Master and His Emissary that talks about the division of the left and the right brain. The left brain, it goes on to say, controls much of the map making, the tangible, the certain, those things that we can grab onto. The right brain, on the other hand, is abstract. It looks for meaning in things that may or may not happen. It's where wisdom comes. It is based on the intangible. The author goes on to say, unfortunately, that while both of these hemispheres are needed for certain things, that the way that our society has been constructed and the way that much of Western civilization has operated is by subverting the right hemisphere. so that only the graspable, the certain, is what we focus on. I think that the prophetic imagination speaks into that reality. It speaks to this left hemisphere, this abstract, this intangible thing, a hope of a future where there isn't pain, where there isn't injustice, where mercy abounds. You see, the prophets lived firmly in the in-between, knowing of the current crises that affected the people of Israel, and how that would later speak to the current crises that we are facing right now in 2020, while also saying that we do not live into that. As followers of God, as followers of Yahweh, we live into this future. This beautiful, incredible, poetic future that says that we can be repairers of the breach, restorers of streets to live in. This is the hope that the prophet Isaiah calls us to live into. The prophets grasp not for the certainty that brings so much comfort in this world, but courageously jump into the unknown and proclaim a world of justice and reconciliation. The great Hebrew scholar Abraham Heschel says of the last 26 chapters of Isaiah, "They are of no age. It is prophecy tempered with human tears, mixed with a joy that heals all scars, clearing a way for understanding the future in spite of the present. No words have ever gone further in offering comfort when the sick world cries." You see, the art of Isaiah 58 speaks in to our current crisis, speaks in to the suffering of our current world, and calls us as followers of God to live into a different reality, to stand in solidarity, to speak against injustice, to sojourn for truth. It is in all of these things that we need the prophetic imagination. It is easy to get lost in the weeds of the prophets. We can study all that was going on in Israel and think that the powerful words of both woe and hope were meant for the long past. That is a great disservice to these artists. The words of the prophet Isaiah, meant for the people some 2,500 years ago, still ring true today, if we just listen. These women and men spoke truth into and hope into the desolation of their times, and thus their words carry on into today. The artists haven't stopped speaking. Maybe we have stopped listening. Isaiah is just one in a long line of people who dreamed things that never were and asked why not. Whether it be modern artists like Martin Luther King Jr., Ava DuVernay, Barry Jenkins, Vic Mensa, or Wendell Berry, or those ancient prophets, Deborah, Rahab, Hannah, Micah, Hosea, Habakkuk, or Isaiah. I encourage us all to find the art that speaks to us and daily encourages us to live into the hope of God's future and not settle for today's injustice. Maybe then we can live into the dreams of the prophet Isaiah and be repairers of the breach and restorers of streets to live in. People who loose the bonds of injustice, undo the thongs of the yoke, and let the oppressed free. Amen. I now, as part of this sermon, want to share with you some art that is speaking to me today. I hope it does to you as well. This is a poem by Bobby Lefebvre, who is the first person of color who is named Poet Laureate of Colorado. And it's called Nothing Left. And when there is nothing left to do but live, let us retire the noise and build a home inside the stillness. Grab a wrench and unfasten the parts of you that have become mechanical. Rest your weary limbs in the bed of anomaly. Outside, the machine is powering down. You can hear the birds when the gears aren't grinding. When there is nothing left to do but live, make a vacation of your body. Each part explored. A stamp on your passport. Begin with your heart, maybe. Crawl inside and sightsee. Ask difficult questions about who it is and why. Outside, the machine is powering down. You can hear yourself when the gears aren't grinding. When there is nothing left to do but live, simply show up. That has always been enough. And together, in this sudden strangeness, radical imagination will run wild. Tomorrow being built today. I hope that all of you are encouraged to have the radical imagination of the prophets, to see in God's future the hope for a world that is not yet, but is becoming. May you live into that radical imagination. And may we speak to injustice and extend mercy and walk humbly with God. Amen.
Open our eyes to see the things that make your heart cry. To be the church that would desire your light to be seen. Break down our pride and all the walls we built up inside. Our earthly crowns and all our desires we lay at your feet. So let hope arise and darkness tremble at your holy light. And every eye will see Jesus our God, great and mighty to be praised. Let hope arise and darkness tremble in your holy light. And every eye will see Jesus our God, great and mighty to be praised. God of all days, glorious in all of light of your name. So let hope arise and darkness tremble in your holy light, and every eye will see Jesus our God, great and mighty to be praised. Lord, we offer ourselves to you now, with everything, we will shout for your glory. With everything, we will shout forth your praise. With everything, we will shout for your glory. With everything, we will shout forth your praise. Our hearts they cry, be glorified, be lifted high above all names. For you are King. With everything, we'll shout forth your praise. Whoa, whoa. Our hearts they cry, be glorified, be lifted high above all names. For you are King. With everything, we will shout forth your praise. Whoa, whoa, whoa.